Well, looks like you all liked the first one.
So now we are back with a second one.
From crazy tornadoes to deadly attacks, we've got it all on today's list of the top 10 amazing people who survived the impossible part 2.
What's the buzz, Bumblebee? Welcome back to our channel. I'm your host, Rachel Fisher.
And I'm Bree, and get ready to witness the impossible. At number 10, Poon Lim. Back during World War II, nowhere was safe. Allied forces were risking their lives wherever they went because those they were fighting seemed to have been one step ahead every time. One of the most dangerous places for Allies was in open water because fleets were crossing the ocean trying to bring supplies back and forth from the front lines, and German forces were waiting to strike from above and below water. In 1942, a British ship was crossing the Atlantic Ocean coming from South Africa on its way to deliver supplies, but once the ship reached the coast of South America, it was torpedoed and it sank. The only person to survive was a member of the ship's crew named Poon Lim, and he managed to jump ship just before it sank. Because of the conditions, Poon Lim might not have survived had his luck not come through. You see, after jumping ship, he managed to find one of the ship's rafts and some canisters of water and food floating in the water. With this, he was able to survive drifting off the coast of South America for 133 days before he was found and rescued by a Brazilian fisherman. Other than having a severe sunburn and some stomach issues from eating raw fish that he was able to catch, Poon was in good health when he was found. This man survived all odds and went on to live in the US until 1991.
Number 9, Matt Suter. Are you a big fan of the film Twister? Well, today we have a story that might just be better than the movie. What? Matt Suter literally rode a tornado and lived to tell the tale. Yeah. In 2006, Matt was at his grandmother's trailer standing on the couch trying to seal the window because there was a storm outside. The weather was really bad, but he didn't know how bad until the floor started moving and everything started like swirling around him. The doors were being torn off. Matt was in the middle of being swept up in a tornado. The next moment, he was sucked out of a collapsing wall into a whirling, swirling darkness. Also, forget ruby slippers, the guy was only in his underpants. He really shouldn't have survived this. Like, he really shouldn't have, especially with all the debris flying around. But flash forward to Suter regaining consciousness about 3 football fields away, 390 meters from the trailer, making him, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, the farthest distance survived in a tornado. What's even crazier is all he had were like a few scrapes and bruises. Yeah.
In at number 8, Louis Zamperini. This next individual not only survived one life-altering event, but 2, and it's pretty incredible. Back in 1943, during World War II, Louis Zamperini and his crewmates were flying their plane during a rescue mission over the Pacific when something malfunctioned and they crashed. They survived the initial crash and found refuge on a raft, but after 33 days, one of their crewmates passed away, leaving Louis and one other member. Those 2 were able to survive on that raft for 47 days, living off fish and rainwater, and soon they were found by Japanese forces, but that's when things got even worse for them. They were captured and tortured by a camp sergeant who was referred to as the Bird. While imprisoned, Louis endured so much. At one point, the Bird ordered the other prisoners to take turns punching Louis in the face for 2 straight hours. Another time, Louis was forced to hold a large heavy beam over his head for nearly 40 minutes before being forcibly knocked to the ground. But even after all of that, Louis ended up surviving the war and was liberated in 1945. He even went out of his way to meet with the Bird one last time years later to tell him that he forgave him for everything that he was put through. Talk about a survival story.
Number 7, Dr. Anna Bagenholm. In May 2000, on her usual ski trail in Narvik, Norway, Dr. Anna at age 29 was ready for a break, but there were some unexpected turns in her trip that would make her world renowned. She lost her balance suddenly on a gully, which launched her headfirst into an icy river. She was stuck submerged under the ice, but Anna managed to reach an air pocket that might have saved her life. Her torso and head were stuck for 40 minutes while she struggled to break through. Anna was no doubt exhausted and her body was sinking slowly into a deathly state of hypothermia. Still, she maintained her determination, but it would be another 40 minutes before her companions found her and cut her out of the ice, dragged her out, but by then her body temp had significantly dropped to 57 degrees Fahrenheit. She should have died minutes later, but somehow she held on. Doctors were able to revive her by slowly warming her blood. In 2013, Bagenholm began working in the very same hospital that saved her life, and her case led to investigations into therapeutic hypothermia. Strangely enough, it may have been the cold that helped save her.
At number 6, Slavomir Rovics. You know that song 500 Miles? You know, the one where the guy is singing about how he would walk 500 miles and would walk 500 more and all that jazz? Well, imagine if it wasn't 500 but 4,000. Would you still walk that far? Well, if you're in a life or death situation like Slavomir Rovics, then you might. Slavomir was a Polish cavalry officer in World War II who was captured by German forces, sent to Moscow in 1939, and was later sentenced to 25 years of hard labor in Siberia. Bad start. Siberia is known for its harsh winter climate, so this sentence was going to be very, very harsh, and Slavomir wanted none of that. By 1941, during a blizzard, Slavomir and 6 other inmates managed to hatch a plan and escape from the prison that they were being held in. Desperate to get as far away from the enemy as possible, the prisoners walked 4,000 miles, crossing the Gobi Desert and the Himalayas, enduring blazing heat, intense cold, thirst, starvation, and exhaustion. They were eventually able to reach safety in India, where they were rescued by Gurkha Patrol, and by this point Slavomir only weighed 70 pounds. Later on in life though, he wrote a book about his miraculous survival.
Number 5, Helen Klaben. Helen Klaben took a nosedive out of her comfort zone when she decided to see what life was like outside of New York City. What she didn't know was that she would encounter a challenge far larger than what she bargained for. After her stint in Fairbanks concluded, she hopped on a plane with pilot Ralph Flores. Due to a heavy storm and lack of tech control, their plane crashed in the Alaskan wilderness at minus 40 degrees Celsius below. No thank you. Both were severely injured. Helen broke her arm and crushed her foot. Flores had lacerations and a broken jaw. Despite all odds, the pair survived on toothpaste, tree bark, snowshoes, and whatever else they could find over 49 days. Their meager rations ending 15 days in. Klaben got frostbite and gangrene in her broken foot, and it wasn't until the two carved SOS into the snow that they were finally rescued. For a woman who had never left Brooklyn to survive without emergency gear or rations with a gangrenous foot, this story is like...
At number 4, Janelle Guzman McMillan. The attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001 changed the lives of so many, and it was a moment where the world seemed to have stood still. There are so many stories from those who were affected by the events of the attack, one of those stories being that of Janelle Guzman McMillan, a woman who survived the attack against all odds. Janelle sat down for an interview to tell her story about how she miraculously survived the attack and told the source about how she was working in one of the towers when the attack took place. She said that at first there was no sign of smoke or fire, and her boss told the company to just remain calm and wait for help, but instead Janelle headed for the stairway. She started heading down the stairs, but by the time she got to the 13th floor, she went to go take off her shoe, and suddenly a wall fell on her, pinning her feet and trapping her head between 2 blocks of concrete. The only thing that Janelle was able to move was her left hand, and when she tried opening her eyes, everything was black. She laid in the rubble for 27 hours before being rescued after she was spotted by one of the many search and rescue dogs that were brought to the site. Janelle ended up being the last living person to be rescued from the wreckage.
Number 3, Mary Vincent. This one gets pretty dark, so please trigger warning for anyone who wants to avoid severe tales of violent attacks and assaults. Just leaving that out there. I couldn't leave this story off the list, it's so incredible. Mary Vincent survived the impossible and continues to help survivors to this day. In September 1978, Mary Vincent was hitchhiking to Berkeley, California when 50-year-old Lawrence Singleton picked her up. He looked harmless, but little did Mary know he would change her life forever. He viciously attacked Mary, cut off both her arms, and threw her off a cliff. He thought she was dead, but Mary, oh no one messes with Mary. This girl is the real Kill Bill. This woman, armless, stripped, and in excruciating pain, climbed back up the cliff, was rescued by a couple on their honeymoon, and proceeded to toss her assailant behind bars. The one thought that kept her going was that she didn't want this to happen to anyone else. That literally got her out of her stupor and she climbed back up. Unfortunately, Lawrence was released just after 8 years into his sentence. Eye roll. But then he took another life, and after that got the death penalty. Lawrence died in 2001 from cancer, and Mary, well, she's an artist, has 2 amazing kids, and continues to speak out against violence. Mary Vincent, you are a damn hero.
At number 2, Old Christians Club. This next story of survival against odds was so unbelievable that it just had to be turned into a movie. In October of 1972, a Uruguayan plane en route from Chile carrying a rugby team and their families crash landed in the Andes Mountains. Of the 45 passengers on board, 25 of them survived, but just 2 weeks later, 8 more lost their lives when an avalanche hit the crash site. Because of the avalanche, the other survivors, who were trapped in the snow at an altitude of more than 13,000 feet, got desperate to survive, and they had to resort to something pretty grisly. Hold on to your coats, guys, because this one's gonna get a little dark. The old Christian club survivors eventually resorted to eating the flesh of their dead friends and family who were preserved by the snow and cold. 2 months after the crash, 2 of the remaining survivors got desperate and decided to wander off from the crash site and hiked off into the wilderness in search of any help. Miraculously, after 10 days of walking, they found a livestock herder, and by the following day, they were able to get rescue crews and helicopters out to the crash site to save the remaining survivors. It is a miracle that they were able to survive so long.
And last but not least, Aaron Ralston. Don't worry, this list will not be 127 hours long by the time we are finished, but we are definitely going to talk about Aaron Ralston. If you have seen the film, then you may know the remarkable story of this rock climber. In April 2003, Aaron was taking on Utah's Blue John Canyon by himself when tragedy struck. While climbing, an 800-pound boulder fell onto Aaron, trapping and crushing his right hand. Entirely alone, Aaron had to do everything he could to survive. After chipping away at the boulder proved unsuccessful and a pulley rig with his climbing rope was useless, there was only one thing left. Ralston had to do the unthinkable and self-amputate his own arm. He devised a turnkey, and even though he had no feeling in his hand, Aaron had to painstakingly cut through each nerve and break his own bone, which he describes was 100 times worse than any pain I've felt before, unquote. No kidding. He then rappelled down the 60-foot cliff where a family hiking found him and called emergency services. Now equipped with a prosthetic, Aaron has remarkably begun climbing again, because obviously nothing is impossible when it comes to Ralston.
And that was our list of the top 10 amazing people who survived the impossible part 2.
We hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, you know, you can like it and subscribe and do all those things, and you know, it's just gonna be a great time.
Yeah, leave us a comment, tell us what you're doing this weekend or something.
Yeah.
I have been your host, Bree Room.
And I'm Rachel Fisher, and until next time, remember to be safe.
And be kind and do all the other bee things, honeys and sweetness. Awesome, woo!
Just be careful.